I'm Daniel Gross, and this is The Number. The number today is 2.2 trillion. That's the expected pace of U.S. exports this year. That and other topics relating to the U.S. and its role in the world will be front and center at tonight's debate between President Obama and Governor Romney. Ian Bremmer of the Eurasia Group, which is one of the leading, I would say, political risk assessment, economic consulting firms, probably the leading.
Well, we'd like to say that, absolutely. We're talking the biggest. I mean, leading is in the eyes of the beholder.
We hear a lot about trade tonight, or I think we should hear a lot about trade. Is the U.S. doing poorly in this new world?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of other countries out there that are much more aggressive in terms of signing new bilateral deals on trade. The United States hasn't opened a lot recently, and so there is a question of, well, you know, is the U.S. going to be left behind?
We've got South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Yeah, that's a few million people.
That's true. Yeah, it's not global, and there is, of course, a concern. The Chinese government is working very closely with their industry. The state is the dominant player in their economy. They have a very different model than the United States does, and they're growing really fast. So their leverage is significant, including their leverage with the United States. So what do you do with that if you're Obama or Romney?
Now, Romney has generally spoken in much tougher tones about China.
Yes.
I'm going to get tough with them. I'm going to label them a currency manipulator.
On day one.
This comes up every 4 years, and then nothing happens. Forget about the rhetoric. Do you think there's any real difference between Obama and Romney and how they view, and our government generally, and the parties on how they view China?
On China, I think
there's a policy.
I think there's virtually zero difference between Romney and Obama on China. I think when Obama came in, he wanted to do softer, tread more softly on China, and he had he got a comeuppance when he made his town hall meeting in Beijing, and that meeting did not go well at all. And he's also heard from American industry that they're increasingly upset with intellectual property, indigenous innovation, other big issues in dealing with the Chinese and competing with the Chinese. And I think today, you have, both candidates understand that China is an enormous threat, but they don't talk about it in very obvious ways. That Romney called Russia our lead geopolitical foe. Obama said it was Al-Qaeda, and this was even after bin Laden was killed. In reality, of course, the U.S. challenge that is by far head and shoulders above anything else is China, but we never talk about it. It's like the Voldemort of U.S. foreign policy.
And yet, despite the these tensions, and we're always getting into it, and we're going to do this to them, and they're always saber rattling, because in China, one of the few things you're permitted to speak freely about in politics is how great China is and how bad the U.S. sucks. Our trade relationship continues to deepen. China sells more cars. GM sells more cars in China than it does in the U.S. All the soybeans that we make get exported there. If you go to China, you will see American brands all over the place. And it seems like, the sort of Fortune 500, while they do have some specific complaints, they seem to be getting a fair amount out of this.
So let's be careful, because there are two different stories going on with China right now. On the one hand, you've got a lot of companies that are making a lot of money in China, and a lot of American companies that are keeping their balance sheets afloat, right? I mean, Yum Brands is basically a failed company in the United States, and in China, they are world-beating with KFC,
well, I think Taco Bell still kind of rocks still at home. They got the Dorito taco.
I'm glad you feel that way, but you by yourself are not going to keep them afloat.
I've been trying.
So when I think about the fact that the Japanese are about to overtake the Chinese in terms of being the leading external holders of American paper, that is in part because the Chinese are trying to diversify. Furthermore, Facebook just got their 1 billionth user, right? And Zuckerberg said that he wants to connect the rest of the world 7 billion to Facebook. That's a great Coca-Cola-like concept, except China has no interest in Facebook or Twitter or Google being there.
They do a pretty good job violating people's privacy without Facebook. They've already got that figured out.
They certainly do not want an American company controlling that data. They want their own government controlling that data. Well, there are a lot of American companies that are having these kinds of problems. And even Apple, which is a world-beating brand, because they've been very reluctant to provide a lot of their technology and share a lot of their profits with the Chinese government has been very lenient in allowing lots of non-Apple stores that look and smell like Apple stores, the workers even think they work for Apple stores, to pop up and make their own money. So I would be careful at saying globalization free and easy. And by the way, let's keep in mind that you've got companies like Toyota and Nissan. The Japanese have sold 50% fewer cars in the last month in China than they sold the month before. things can go badly quickly when you have exposure to a state capitalist authoritarian market, the biggest in the world.
Now, you drop among the many interesting nuggets you dropped in that last soliloquy. There's one about Japan, which is, we always think of China, you'll hear a lot of talk about this tonight, that we owe all this money to China. We're borrowing from China to pay for Big Bird and subsidies and all this stuff. Japan has been coming up pretty rapidly in their purchase of U.S. government debt. And in fact, now it's almost equal.
That's right.
And 25 years ago, we regarded Japan as the great threat, and now we see them as sort of these kind of cuddly counterparts. What's going on there?
I don't know how cuddly, but certainly counterparts. And let's face it, the Americans have a military alliance with Japan. The Japanese can't defend themselves from that perspective. And so when there is a fight between Japan and China over these contested islands in the East China Sea, they desperately need the United States. When the Americans have problems with Iran, and the Europeans tell us to go scratch, and the Germans say we're going to keep doing some business, the Japanese are the ones that the INPEX pulls out of the Azadagan fields. Their banks say absolutely no, we're going to stop. So the Japanese, they're not handmaidens to the United States, but they do carry water on national security issues, and ultimately the Americans are going to be more comfortable with the Japanese holding a lot of American paper than they are with Beijing.
Right, of course, 4 years from now in the campaign, you will probably hear presidential candidates complaining about how much we owe to Japan instead of China. Ian Bremmer, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll look for all this talk about foreign policy in the debates tonight.